much for joining me back on my channel. This afternoon time I want to talk to you about the story of creation. How it all started, how it all began. Was there literally 6 days of creation, or was there something beyond existing time? Was there something taken out of nothing, or there was existing universe where God had to actually use evolution to bring the story of mankind into the picture? These kind of questions are very profound because science actually debates a lot on this, but taking it back to the question of the existence of God. But if I had to tell you that the story of creation is genuine, even though it is the 6 literal days of creation, that's how I adopt it. And looking at it from a historical standpoint, I would take each day as a single day, and then God created everything in 6 days of time. The reason being is, if I have to limit God's ability in a box and tell you that God actually used multiple sources to bring this picture of creation into motion, then that wouldn't make him a real source and a supreme power. An ultimate loving God who is having ultimate power, who is sovereign, who can all see, he can see everything, who can feel everything, can definitely make anything in any given point of time. So that is the reason why I adopt the 6 days of literal view of creation. Richard Everbeck actually proposes this kind of creation, and I completely support with him. The reason being is, unless you read the story of Genesis in a literal view, you wouldn't actually come to a conclusion of understanding God's great plan for mankind. Now, if you have to believe the first 4 verses of the very beginning of the Bible, it says, "In the beginning, God." And if you don't believe the first 4 verses and frame it into a mind, then it would be difficult for you to understand how it shapes further into the story of the notion of creation of mankind. So that's where I would say your emphasis, it's not a figurative reasoning. One of the reasons why I go back to the figurative reasoning is nothing can be myth. The Bible is not mythological. It doesn't talk about myth. So bridging in and putting figurative reasoning into the context wouldn't actually fulfill the subject at hand. Many times theologians and many people who are actually close friends of mine adopt the theistic evolution of creation of mankind, which I see a great drawback because of the figurative reasoning. Not just that, but also drawing some parallels from the ancient Near Eastern culture, from the Babylonian creation of world, and also from the Sumerian creation of world, where it talks about Eruma, Elish creation, also Gilgamesh creation, which are parallels that can be drawn from those stories to tell that the creation story is unique and it is evident. Now look back at the story. First 6 days, the first 3 days where God actually created everything, like the heavens and earth, separated light versus darkness, and breathed in everything. And the remaining 3 days comes into the picture where God actually starts filling the earth, like filling it with plants, vegetation, also making man at the 6th day, and then asking him to flourish on the face of the earth. It also talks about the historicity of Adam. If you date back to the book of Romans, where Paul clearly writes about the creation story and accounts Adam as an historic person, if that was not the case, then the whole story of creation is a myth, and the God which we are actually tuning into worship would be possible myth as well. Now Paul clearly accounts that the story of creation is historical. Adam is a historic person, Eve is a historic person who lived on the face of the earth. That is how actually you tune actually brings out to the point of considering Jesus also as an historic person on the face of the earth. Not just drawing all these parallels from the theistic evolution. I just want to tell you something. If you have to believe that something evolved out of nothing, and even the mankind race started out of evolution, then that would be a real disaster. The reason being is, understanding that there are biological parents for Adam and Eve wouldn't actually bring into the light of the context, but believing that God actually breathed his air into the lungs of man and then creating him in his own image, because we are made in the image of God to worship him. Look at the creation stories that draws parallel from the ancient Near Eastern pictures, where multiple creations are recorded, where multiple gods existed. They have created mankind from another god's blood, and they have created mankind just to make sure that they ease out on their burdens. And there were multiple gods who were ruling the heaven and the earth. Looking at all these stories, it profoundly talks about being a myth. And also the centuries dating back to Moses when he was writing this Pentateuch and giving away the story in the book of Genesis and dating it back to the early manuscripts. He was clearly profound while giving away this story. Maybe there existed some ancient Near Eastern parallels who were actually jolting it down and living in that era, but that doesn't disprove the existence of Bible. That doesn't disprove the existence of the creation of God, and thus doesn't disprove the mankind was made in the image of God. It literally talks that the creation was made in 6 days. Now there is also another possibility of talking about it from an old earth creation view and a new earth creation view. Did God really create it in 6 days, or God really took some kind of years together to create it? This actually, to me, actually questions the sovereignty of God, and omnipotent, omniscient, and omnipresent God would definitely have the ability of doing whatever he wants. He would have the ultimate power to do something within a matter of time. If he could create and separate heavens and earth in a day span, I would easily think that he can do anything within 6 days of creation. So I myself, being a young earth creationist, approach the literal view of creation and also see it from an historical standpoint. The next time someone asks you the question of creation, I want you to very well remember that God made man in his own image, and not just that, but he created everything out of nothing. There was no Big Bang theory, there was no scientific evolution, there was no theistic evolution, but I believe that God through his own hands created man and breathed air into his lungs, and that's how man can flourish. Now if you had to ask about the questions that theistic evolution raises regarding the historicity of Cain and how he lived and whom he married and why he had to be afraid when he was cursed, I would definitely say that there was a big picture and a gap that was not parallelly fulfilled. Recording each and every event into that particular frame size would be difficult to understand, but then I would definitely clearly believe that there's no figurative reasoning to understand, fill in, and then believe that there are some gaps in the Bible, but there would be definitely a story that's being followed through. There are also the creation stories that's being taught, that mankind was created to actually help God's nature, but that's not actually true, because man was made in the image of God to glorify God. That's how the creation story sums up, and that's for me Genesis is all about. I would take the literal view of creation any day, any time, to prove the historicity of Adam and believe that it was God who was existing before time, and it was God who created everything out of nothing, and after creating everything out of nothing, he flourished and made mankind and asked him to flourish on the face of the earth. Thank you so much for giving me this reading. God bless you all.